Welcome everyone to tonight's presentation from the Santa Cruz Museum of Natural History. My name is Marisa Gomez and I'm the museum's public programs manager. And I'm excited to be joined tonight by local historian Geoffrey Dunn, who I will introduce properly in a moment for him to regale us with more tales of the sea. But first, we always want to start by acknowledging that the museum resides on the unceded territory of the Yupi tribe of the Awaswas Nation. And today these lands are stewarded by the Amamutsan tribal band, whose ancestors were taken to Mission Santa Cruz and Mission San Juan Bautista during Spanish colonization of the Central Coast. The Amamutsan are working hard to fulfill their obligation to Creator, to care for and steward Mother Earth and all living things through relearning efforts in the Amamutsan Land Trust. And also just take a moment to note that our next online talk is going to be with Mike Groen, who is an archaeologist who partners with the tribe. So definitely join us for that. And I also want to note that tonight's program is in honor of the museum's latest special exhibit, Maritime Mysteries and Monsters, diving into the ocean's dark side through startling specimens and superstitions, as well as unveiling what we've learned about the ocean's depths through efforts of places like MBARI, which is the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute. And I just want to show off one photo from that exhibit to tease you all about it, because we are really so pleased with how it all turned out. And I really hope you all have a chance to explore it before it closes on November 6th. This is just one little part of it. And then again, back to the chat, which is now enabled. We are going to be communicating with you all during the chat tonight. Your mic and video are disabled. So please make sure that when you send your messages, if you could switch it to the option for everyone instead of hosts and panelists, that makes it more fun. And then I'll be monitoring the chat, and will at the very end, once Jeff's done with his presentation, I'll go through all of your questions and comments and we'll have a conversation at the end. So just feel free to chat away throughout the program. And also a reminder of our wonderful prompt here. We would love to hear what's the strangest thing you have seen at the beach or in the ocean. And while you're jotting those down, allow me to introduce tonight's speaker, Geoffrey Dunn, who is an award-winning journalist, filmmaker, and historian, and has written extensively about California culture and history, including the Monterey Bay's maritime history, which he has covered for over 4 decades. He's a Santa Cruz local, lots of stories to tell. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that we can now hand it over more formally to you, Jeff.
Thank you. Let me see if I can now share my screen.
Let's see.
Vamos a ver.
While you're doing that, I see Lisa has seen fossilized trees on the beach heading into the ocean off the island of Anglesey, Wales, which is amazing. That's awesome. Cool.
Okay, I have now clicked to share. Let's see if it works.
Yeah, it's sharing. And then if you want to just go into your slideshow mode.
Okay, slideshow mode.
Cool, let's do it.
Did it work?
Yep, it's working.
A miracle.
Cool.
I called this the Old Man of Monterey Bay because there was a famous sea monster when I was a kid who was known as the Old Man of Monterey Bay, and I'll get into those details in a little bit. This is part of a cartoon of what he was said to look like. And this cartoon was an important part of my childhood, really. And I have the real copy of it, probably 8 feet from me right now, that I salvaged from a garbage can when I was in my late teens or early 20s. And I couldn't believe someone was going to throw it away. But I guess one man's junk is another person's treasure. And so I'm glad I saved it. And I have been sort of pursuing this story for many years. The very first local history story I ever wrote was about this myth, this legend, this creature. And I wrote it because I realized this is the type of history that's not often taken seriously or maintained in the culture. And although it was very central to my life, by the time I was in my 20s, no one had heard about it. So I have published a few stories about it. And I have to say that in preparing this slideshow and lecture today, that I've really changed my perspective on the story. I've enlarged it and come to terms with some of it a bit more. Nothing real heavy about that, but it's I'm grateful for this opportunity, and it's been fun to kind of expand my perception of the story a little bit. One of the ways that's happened is that I've realized that sea monsters are not special to Monterey Bay. And I think when I was young, I had the sense that, the sea monster of Monterey Bay was unique. And what I've now learned in recent weeks and months is that virtually every large body of water projected these myths and legends, and they go back thousands of years. This is a cartoon drawing of some of these sea monsters from Europe in the 15th century. And virtually every global map included drawings or references to sea monsters. Here we have mermaids, just the sort of mystical, unknown, provocative nature of the ocean. And I talked about the feeling I had seeing the ship coming out of Korea. When you're out there, there's a vulnerability you have at sea, even for great sailors, people very experienced, that exists because you are vulnerable at sea. It's very different than being on land. So it creates a different mood, a different psychic awareness, if you will. And of course, the myth of Leviathan in Western biblical myth and culture is a very large one. This is a William Blake drawing that includes sea monsters and other sort of monsters of the mind that existed. And Leviathan, which is in the reference to Leviathan as this massive creature in the Bible, got translated into a metaphor for human society, for government, by the famous political philosopher Thomas Hobbes. And the drawing also sort of presents this monster, mythical monster in it. And this was a very famous drawing that appeared at the cover of his book, which was very important to the development of Western political philosophy. Other mutations and formations of Leviathan. More recently, there's been drawings of what were perceived to be prehistoric sea monsters that actually lived in the sea. There's been some fossils that have been found that are sort of like, I'm not good with dinosaurs, but what is the one? Tyrannus Rex, is that what it was called? That actually lived in the ocean and had qualities similar to, say, alligators or crocodiles, that were very real and are part of the history of life in the ocean. Other more verified creatures that came out of the ocean also had impact on the way people felt about these unknown creatures from the deep. More recent piece that was found in Southern California that washed up to shore more recently. Still, there are sea animals that come up that lend credence to these myths of sea monsters. And this is celebrated in inland Los Angeles, every year they put together one of these sea monsters near, I think it's near Gardenia, and they decorate it with pumpkins and other vegetables. And so this whole myth of sea monsters continues to this day, and celebration of them. I want to now switch to California at the turn of the 19th century into the 20th. And I've gone back and read probably 500 accounts of sea monsters off the California coast in the last century and a half. And this was sort of the first one, devilfish, which is a term for octopus. And of course, devilfish, octopus, sort of ascribing an evil to the monster. Long Beach is the scene of an exciting fight to rescue a young woman from the deadly clutches of a sea monster. I believe this was 1890s, and the young woman was rescued by fishermen who had to dive off the boat and cut her away from the tentacles of the octopus. But again, front page headlines, sort of capturing the imagination of communities up and down the coast. This was the first real reference I saw to a sea monster in Santa Cruz County, 1909 from October. And this was a 70-foot whale that had washed ashore on Waddell Beach, north of Davenport. And people had seen a struggle between what was believed to be a swordfish and a great blue whale. Now, this is an ad that appeared in local newspapers. And what I found, it was like, oh, wow. This was the new Santa Cruz Theater, which was located at the corner of Pacific and Walnut Avenues, in the building that now houses the Walnut Avenue Cafe, breakfast and lunch restaurant downtown. Not just kind of kitty corner from the Del Mar Theater. And what was interesting is, as you'll notice, the wonders of the sea were being shown on film, of bloodthirsty octopuses, man-eating sharks, deadly morays, dangerous barracuda, and every other ferocious sea monster in his quote-unquote natural lair. And I was thinking, the whole idea of sea monsters was brought to life here in the early 20s with this film showing. And of course, this is the beginning of commercial film being shown in Santa Cruz. The new Santa Cruz Theater was one of the first big theaters downtown. And the transition, of course, went, as it did everywhere, from live presentations, vaudeville, to screen presentations. So they were seeing these monsters in expanded size on the silver screen. Then a couple years later, photographs first started appearing in newspapers. And there was this photograph from Moores Beach, which was or is now Natural Bridges Beach. And this unknown sea monster washed up to shore. It was nearly 40 feet in length. And no one had ever seen anything like it. Now, I have been collecting images of it largely off eBay in recent years, but from various sources, and you can get a sense of it this was a big story in Santa Cruz. Note the date, 1925, a few years after that film footage had first arrived. And people went out, crowds went out to see the spectacle of this unknown at the time creature. People eventually realized that it was probably a rare beaked whale, which it was, and it was eventually brought to the Sciences Building assembled up in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco, where it still exists, the skeleton of this creature. But you get a sense of the size. People went down and took photos with it, souvenir photos. And by all accounts, no one knew what it was, but they would joke, "We know what it smells like." And you can imagine the smell. It evidently wafted it over the whole west side by the time it was hauled away. And see, people were out, and how they used to dress to the beach in their quote unquote Sunday best. This angle on this monster out there really gives a pretty good sense of what it looked like, and I think established itself sort of in the mind's collective consciousness of the community. I'm switching over a little bit because I wanted you to see that what's important is this happens in Monterey Bay, this story, but it also happens with a group of mostly men, almost entirely all men actually, who started seeing the sea monster. I wanted to show this picture for many reasons. I love it. One of the classic characters in Santa Cruz history, Big John Perez, is located sort of at the left with the black hat. You see a very big gentleman there who's part of the Perez family from Branciforte. So his ancestors had been working on the local waterfront for about a century by the time this photo was taken. But the other thing I wanted to show that's important is the size of the fish that were caught in Monterey Bay when the first deep sea fishing abilities were established here in Monterey Bay. The catches were enormous. The bay was full of very, very, very large ancient fish. See the size of that one rockfish in the middle of the photograph. Just spectacular catches. And they would box them up in those fish boxes, throw ice on them, and send them up to San Francisco for commercial sale. And the commercial element is important throughout. We can't forget that there was a commercial element to all the fishing that was going on here at the time. So this is 1937, and this is from the Santa Cruz Sentinel, but the story came from Monterey. Fishermen view sea monster, old man of Monterey Bay affrights seiners. Now, this is one of the first newspaper notices that I discovered of the old man being sighted, but it's cited by Monterey fishermen. The Monterey fishing community was similar in some ways, but different in others from Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz Fishing Colony, of which I'm a fourth generation member, were largely Ligurian or Genovese fishermen. And the Monterey fishermen were largely Sicilian, families rooted on the island of Sicily. And they were very competitive with each other, and literally would have various type of violent interactions out in the middle of the bay at times. But what I love about this is that I know the Coletto family and the Alighieri family and the Ballesteri family, and all of these guys, their sons and grandsons who I knew growing up from playing sports in against Monterey High School, had all seen this old man. Now, the irony is that he had a nickname down there called Bobo, which was my nickname in my family, one of my nicknames. So I always kind of was fascinated by the story down there, and I want to research the story more in Monterey. So that's 1937. But note, it said it looked like the face of a very old man or monkey with two eyes twice the diameter of breakfast buns and a mouth like a crescent moon. Barnacles were all over the head and also along the black body. Folds of white skin hung beneath the neck. The body was as big around as a pickup truck. It must have weighed maybe 8 or 9 tons. Very large. 2 years later is the first account of the old man appearing in Santa Cruz. And I have to say, I've just found this account recently. And 2 of the people in it identified are guys I've worked with on the waterfront with. Johnny Bassano, who's just a sweetheart, and Lyle Bud Terra, who I was his deckhand on a fishing boat when I was in my late teens and then again in my 20s. And I worked with both of these guys on the waterfront with one of my cousins, Billy Stagnaro, and then Joe LaRue and John Totten. All are people I knew. Now I was born in 55, so I didn't really, I came of age as a teenager in the 60s and 70s. This happened 30 years before, and they all told me about this legend and having seen the old man. So that's when the story really came to life for me in a very real way, and I was fascinated by it. Now, at the same time that the old man was first spotted, there were still crazy large fish coming out of out of Monterey Bay. This is a fascinating story. This is a sunfish that weighed roughly 1,000 pounds, a mola mola. And the guy who caught it didn't catch it with a fishing pole. That was a myth. He actually shot it right off of Mitchell's Cove, which is just west of Lighthouse Point, and brought it in, and it became immediately commercialized. As you'll see, this was a widely sold postcard, black and white postcard from that era. And then it was used, they added the salmon and a young woman in a bathing suit to commercialize it more. And then they added a sign to sell deep sea fishing trip tickets. So there was, like I said, the commercial link to these stories is always important to note. And what's interesting about this photo is you can look over past the mouth of the San Lorenzo River, and then you can see Black Point in the background, and no Santa Cruz Yacht Harbor. So the davits were still lifting the boats onto the Santa Cruz Wharf at this time. Another shot of a devilfish or octopus. That's the famed Santa Cruz historian and journalist Ernest Otto, who lived into the 1950s, and my Aunt Betty, who lived into roughly the late 1990s, and who was, of all my mom's sisters, probably the one most open to hanging out down with the fish. She was a great character. So one of the things I discovered in going back to look at this story was that the Sentinel in the 1940s, when these sightings of the old man were taking place, would have portraits and descriptions and mini biographies of all the fishermen who had seen the old man of Monterey Bay. And these portraits all focused on their experience with the sea monster. And so here's Augie Canepa, who was one of my favorite characters on the waterfront when I was younger. He always had a stogie coming out of his mouth. He smoked Toscanos, the short Italian cigar. I don't know if I ever saw him without one. Anyway, I love this. Yes, I've seen him sleeping in the surface of the water, which made me think, I wonder if that was some sort of sunfish that he was seeing. But when he wakes up, he sure gives you the once over and then dives for the bottom. So what I realized, there were 30 of these portraits of Santa Cruz Italian fishermen who had seen the old man, and I was related to virtually all of them. And I, of course, heard their stories as a kid about him. And these were not people prone to exaggeration. They liked to have fun, and they were serious guys, but they were very serious about feeling they had seen something out there. So there we have an article, headlines in the Sentinel, Old Man of the Bay is here again. And this is in the 1940s, and very long stories about it. So if you lived in Santa Cruz during this time, the old man of Monterey Bay was part of the local culture, part of local legend and myth, all woven into one, but you couldn't have escaped it. So anyone who lived here in Santa Cruz during that era knew about the old man of Monterey Bay. And of course, people who came after the war and after the coming of the university, that story was not real to them, wasn't part of their lives, part of their lived experience. During World War II, and this is what I think's important, there was a real need to feel that what was being seen was real. And here's a very lengthy article, it doesn't show the whole thing, by Gordon Sinclair, who was the editor of the Santa Cruz Sentinel. They sent their most important journalist and respected journalists onto the story. And the article was quoting scientists who were arguing that it was probably elephant seals, or what they called sea elephants, that were being seen. Now, what's interesting is today, if we were to see an elephant seal out on the bay or on the coast, which I have, they're intimidating creatures. And if you've seen them up in Año Nuevo, New Year's Island, or elsewhere, they are big, ferocious animals. And it could well have been that that's what they were seeing. So I think that explains it. But today people will go, well, how would they know that why wouldn't they think there were sea lions? Well, elephant seals have been nearly wiped out. And there weren't elephant seals up at Año Nuevo. I actually worked my first job at UCSC when I was 20 or 19. I got a job driving marine lab scientists. The marine lab wasn't there. Marine scientists from UCSC out to the island because they hadn't come on land yet. And there's a big sea lion population now down at the southern end of Big Sur, at Piedras Blancas. And they were never there when I was young. We used to surf down there, and they didn't arrive until the 1980s. So Santa Cruz fishermen would not have been familiar with elephant seals at the time. So it's very possible that that's what was going on. They were seeing them and really didn't know what they were. If you look here, you see 200 days till the new water carnival, and you see what looks like a sea serpent in the Santa Cruz plunge. That's Skip Littlefield in that photo. And it says, Santa Cruz sneaking sea serpent seen surf snooking, or surf snaking. Littlefield was sort of the mad promoter of the Santa Cruz waterfront, not only commercial fishing, but also these incredible summertime plunge carnivals that he used to put on. And I recently wrote a story about him bringing Duke Kahanamoko here in the 1930s, the great Hawaiian swimmer. He was always looking for promotions. And again, the sort of the commercial way of exploiting this myth and this legend. He also put on the Day on the Bay festivities. And what they would do is they get all the Italian fishermen. These are members of the Gio family. A lot of them are my cousins and uncles and great uncle, all of whom had seen the sea monster. Now, it's possible they had been hitting the barrel, as they used to call it, a little bit. The guy in the lower left is my great uncle, Manuel Rayur, who was legendary for loving his red wine. But they all did, and every person in this photograph had seen the sea monster. And I worked or fished with almost everyone in that photograph as well. In fact, the guy in the middle was my uncle Risho, Catardo Gio, great uncle. And he is one of the people who taught me how to become a fish filleter, which I did on the wharf until I was 30. And then here they are performing at the Coconut Grove. You'll note that Skip Littlefield, the guy said was the promoter, identifies himself in that photo. We see his back. And this is Johnny Cicchini singing. Dave Ferrari, dear friend of mine who passed away probably 20 years ago, is playing one of the accordions. And every person in that photograph in the background is a relative of mine. And one of the great things of blowing this photo up for this purpose was I went, whoa, there's my cousin Johnny Gio, who's 92 and still alive. So I'm going to go interview him about all this and a few other things as well. You know, history is not cut and dry. It's living, and it always, there's always new sources. So I'm going to write another piece about this, and I'll use Johnny's interview as part of the story. Okay, as I said, this cartoon was something I grew up with. It was on the wall of one of the restaurants, and it's in my office now, and it's about 2.5 feet long. And it was done by Tommy Thompson, who used to come down to Santa Cruz to promote sports fishing down here. And he loves sports fishing. I have many photos of him with big catches of fish. And I just was always fascinated by this graphic. And if you look, it's divided into 3 spots, 3 sections really. The far left side is kind of the big time honchos on the wharf. And there's Skip Littlefield with the camera, the promoter. My great uncle with a kind of an admiral's outfit on, my great uncle Molio, who would soon, at the age of 42, volunteer to go into the Navy for World War II. And then he kind of makes fun of one of the Italian fishermen there. And we see grappa bottles hanging all over the place. So, kind of the stereotypical Italian fisherman being portrayed. And then he lists many of the people who had seen the sea monster, and portrayed it as it was generally described. And he calls it the piscatorial paradox of the Pacific, which was picked up by a lot of writers at the time. And then people out on the boat, not the bigwigs, but just general people fishing out on the commercial sports boats that used to sail out of here all the time. They still do, but not from the wharf as they did back then. And what I thought was fascinating, after I switched it around here, the bottom half, to put it at roughly the same angle as the as that beaked whale, or that was found out at the Marine Lab in 1925. And you can see the similarities. And that could have well been provided the look in people's minds of what this sea monster might have looked like. Now, this is a column by my aunt Estrella in the Sentinel in the early 1960s. And she refers to the cartoon 20 years after it had been originally released by Tommy Thompson, and indicates that someone named Claude Latham, who I didn't know, and my uncle Joe Stagnero reported seeing the old man in the 1960s. And she quotes a lot from the cartoon, and brings the myth back to life. And that's the end of my picture show here. I don't know how to turn this off. Marisa, can you help me?
Hello. Let's see. Let me see if I can make you stop sharing here. There we go. I found out how to do it.
We good?
We're good. Here we are. Cool. Well, thank you so much for that. That was, I found it especially charming how many personal connections you have with these local stories. And I loved your Aunt Betty. So
I loved her too. I love her still.
Yeah. Yeah, that was some amazing pictures in there. And I don't think that we have any questions in the chat so far, but folks, if you'd like to hear more from Jeff about anything or have any specific questions, jot them down there. But I'm interested in just hearing a little bit more about your family connections here in town, and how your family has connected with the coast over the generations that y'all have been here.
Well, I'll give a little background to the Santa Cruz Italian fishing community. In the late 1870s, early 1880s, sailors from the port of Genoa in Liguria, coming from a small village on the Italian coast called Riva Trogoso, began coming to Santa Cruz on sailing ships. And eventually there were 4 families that came One was my great grandfather, and then great aunts and uncles, etc. And they came in. Someone's asking a question.
Sure,
Let me-
we'll get to, you can.
Okay, we'll
you
get
can
to that.
finish
Let
your
me
story
finish
and then
it.
keep them coming, guys.
Okay.
Put them in the chat. We'll get to them.
They came to Santa Cruz and eventually brought like 30 more families here, so that at one point there were 600 members of the fishing colony from this little town in Italy living here. And they it almost replicated the community in Italy. They used some of the same techniques for fishing, and then adapted different types of fishing methods to Monterey Bay, which was different than the Mediterranean. But largely it was because the Mediterranean had been fished out. Okay? So they came here and they did their own fishing out until the Monterey Bay Sanctuary was established and started to protect the local fishery. And you can see how it's come back in the last 30 years, which is a beautiful thing. The other thing that's come back that was taken out largely by Spanish colonialists and other people coming here, the Russians hit it too, wiping out whales, otters, elephant seals, and seals. Those populations have really returned in huge number. When I was a kid, there were no sea otters on the north side of Monterey Bay. And one of the guys in the photo and I saw one, and we got our name in the paper because we'd seen a sea otter. And it was only the second one that had been seen on the north side.
Wow.
Ditto with the elephant seals. Ditto with ditto with whales. Whales were pretty rare to be seen up here. I had an experience, getting back to your original question about seeing things. I hope that everyone in here has got a chance to see whales in the bay. They're phenomenal. But I never saw humpback whales like I've seen in the last 20 years. I went through a real nasty battle with cancer in my early 50s. And I used to, after taking the chemo and radiation, I used to go down to Big Sur to heal. I mean, it was tough. I'm down there one day, and there's an elderly woman. I was in my early 50s, and she was in her 80s. And I spotted off of Point Lobos a splash in the water. And I guess because I've spent so much time at sea, I'm good at seeing, noticing sea mammals. But I'd never seen anything like that. And a herd of humpbacks came into the little cove right off of Point Lobos and Monastery Beach, and put on a show for 20 minutes, just dancing, flying, unbelievable. And she had never seen it. And it turned out she was a friend. She was the mother of a friend of mine who worked down in Big Sur. And he later told me how special it was for her, and that she had died from cancer like 2 months after that.
Oh, man.
So that it was a great gift to her during this time. And it remains a great gift to me. And seeing humpbacks do their thing out there is really, that's a charge.
They are special. And I've heard that from many people who have lived in Santa Cruz longer than myself. I've been here for a little over a decade now. So a little while, but for people who have lived here for 20, 30, 40, 50 years that have asked me, you know, in my capacity of the museum, like, are there more whales now than there used to be? And I keep meaning to like have a talk about that and look into it. But I think that what you were saying about conservation probably makes a lot of sense, because the whales are here because the food is here. And if there are more fish here, then that probably will bring in more whales, which we're grateful for. We're having a talk next week at the museum in person with John Ryan from Mbari, who worked on the hydrophone project that they have, where there's a microphone in the ocean, in the bay, and sounds. and he's going to specifically focus on whale sounds that have been recorded. So I will ask him for more information about whale numbers in the bay. But that's a special story. And we can get Bree, speaking of humpbacks, Bree says 2 separate instances. We had humpbacks in my hometown in the Sacramento River. Cool. That's
Wow.
amazing. That is wild. I wonder why they were going up there. If you have more information, drop it in the chat, Bree. I'm interested in learning more. And then Kevin was interested in the beaked whale. He said, is the beaked whale skeleton on display at the California Academy of Sciences or just in storage there? Like, can you go see it?
The answer is they let me see it once, and I'll be candid. I have 2 pictures of it. Wasn't able to find it in time for the slideshow today.
Okay.
And I think if you look online, you can find it. In one of my articles, I think it's still there, the photos, but
Okay.
they don't have it on permanent display. And what I'd like to do, Kevin, is either get it down to the Natural History Museum or the Museum of Art and History, or both at some point. And I didn't know it was still up there, and a friend of mine had gone up and found it. And seeing it was really incredible. It gave me chills.
Yeah,
And that's how I wanted to end the talk today. But it's a pretty, it's an exciting experience to see this.
Yeah.
Now, having seen all the photos that I've assembled of the beaching of it out at Morse Beach or Natural Bridges.
Your kindred Bobo.
Yeah,
Had a
my
special
Bobo, my cousin Bobo.
I'm going to just share my screen really quick too to point out another sort of connection to Cal Academy that's sort of interesting. This is another bit of sort of local sea monster lore
Right.
that we have a close connection with at the museum, which is this taper-tail ribbonfish here that's on display currently, and we're really happy that it's on display now. When we first opened as a museum in our current location, we have images of it on the wall of those early years here in Seabright. And this is actually, and maybe Jeff, you can tell more about it. I'll just get us started with it. But this was one of those instances where someone caught this fish and was super surprised by it, because it's not a normal fish that you would find here in Santa Cruz that you would be likely to catch, off the Santa Cruz Wharf. And it's sort of similar, like kind of related to the oarfish picture that you showed early on of all
Yes.
the people, but it's a different genus. And this is actually a cast of it, because what happened is while the original fish did come to us here at the museum, we gave it over to, not to Cal Academy, to Smithsonian, sorry.
Right.
Where it's at the Smithsonian now in a really large jar as a wet specimen, which we'd love to have like visit us at some point, or a picture of. But what they did in return is they made this wonderful cast for us. And so we just got it refurbished, which is really wonderful. And so it's back now on display, and that's a really special piece. And do you have anything more to add about the ribbon fish story, Jeff?
Yes, as I said, I literally was a fish cutter at the wharf until I was 30. And I was probably one of the last ones down there because the party boats no longer land and people don't bring the fish to the wharf anymore. But I saw one ribbon fish caught. I've never caught one.
Wow.
But I saw one ribbon fish caught probably in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And it looked just like that. And that fish was caught in the 30s. And it was caught by Agostino Canepa. Now, there were 2 Agostino Canepas who were fishermen here. And I don't know if it was by Gus Canepa or Augie Canepa or Canepa. The family say it 2 different ways. And that was Augie, whose photo I showed with the biography of him in the slideshow. They're both real characters and great fishermen, but I still don't know which one of the 2 it was, but it was Agostino Canepa.
Yeah, I know that we have some older labels from our specimen that say Gus specifically.
Uh-huh.
So,
Okay.
but worth continuing to look into all of these stories.
So if it was Gus, he
Mhm.
fished out of Capitola,
Cool.
and Augie fished out of Santa Cruz.
Oh, why did they have their separate turfs? What's that
Say
about?
that again.
Why did they have their separate turfs?
Well, interesting. And it's a great question. One of my great grandfathers fished out of Santa Cruz, and the other one fished out of Capitola too.
Okay.
And my whole life, unfortunately, has been lived between the Santa Cruz Wharf and the Capitola Wharf. Haven't gotten very far in life.
Not the worst place.
Yeah. I went to Capitola Junior High, so I was out there. Yeah, there were kind of turf wars between the Santa Cruz and Capitola fishermen as well. Capitola had a pretty large fishing colony right at the base where the Venetian apartments are now, the colorful apartments down there on both sides of the entrance to the wharf was the Italian fishing colony of Capitola.
Mhm.
And back when I was young, the fishing grounds of Capitola were very rich and plentiful, and there were a lot of fishermen who still fish out of there. Not so much anymore. It's
Mhm.
pretty much you can go out in the small boats and fish in the kelp beds, or there are certain holes, but not the mass catches that they used to have down there.
And Lisa just chimed in that her dad was a fisherman and never wanted to tread on any other fisherman's turf.
Yeah, you
So,
could get shot. I mean, those
yeah.
guys were tough.
Yeah.
I kind of did once, surfing's that way too, unfortunately, here. And I detest that parochialism with surfing.
Mhm.
But when I moved from Santa Cruz, the west side, to Soquel and came back to surf at Santa Cruz, a guy I had grown up with hit me in the face, telling you're not from here anymore, Dunn.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
He had bad karma after that, but
Yeah.
but that it was similar to that. And then Monterey and Santa Cruz was really intense, the rivalry. Yeah.
And you mentioned so like this Italian colony.
Oh yeah.
So is that like, was there just like a certain part where everyone
Lived, yeah.
Okay, where was that? The
It's
colony?
called the Barranca.
Uh-huh.
And it was bordered basically by Garkey Street up from Lighthouse all the way to Centennial.
Okay.
And there is there's an alleyway there that's named Via Riva Tragoso. That's named after our family's home village. But I grew up during the last vestiges of the Barranca. But I had lunch there every day. I couldn't stand the food at the cafeteria at Bayview Elementary. So I got to go down and eat with my grandmother and great grandmother and everyone else.
And Kevin just said that there are historical signs now at Barranca Park.
Yeah.
Well,
that was done by the city, and it's a great addition.
That is awesome. And then I've also read reference to, so obviously we know about the canneries in Monterey, but canneries in Santa Cruz, like, do you know how many canneries we've had in Santa Cruz?
There were some canneries that were located on Washington Street and even on the wharf. I have a book out that I see periodically in local drugstores. They sell them now, called the Santa Cruz Wharf. I think that's the name of it.
Oh yeah, like one of those then and now.
Arcadia books.
Yeah.
It's just then. There's no now in it.
Yeah.
They also do the then and now.
Right.
And it has some of the pictures from some of the local canneries. But there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wharfs off Santa Cruz. It was a real maritime center.
Yeah.
And prior to the arrival of the railroad, the only way people would come in really was through big ocean schooners. So we were kind of landlocked or bay-locked from getting over what is now Highway 17.
Yeah,
That was
all the more
not,
reason to need a cannery for all
yeah,
this fresh fish that's coming in.
but we got the railroad and right from the beginning, they started shipping it. And as you know, the train runs right above the Capitola Wharf as well. So there was a ramp just west of the trestle in Capitola, where they would take wagons of fish and put it on the train up to San Francisco.
Yeah, and I had no idea that rockfish got that big. I just assumed that was like a tuna or something in that one wonderful picture with, what was
No.
that man's name again with the black hat?
Big John Paris.
Big John, yeah, I love that picture. But yeah, that was a really large rockfish.
Yeah.
And just so they were fishing for just all sorts of things. They were doing like cast line, they were doing like trolling nets for sardines and just all like, can you tell us more about what was out there?
Yes. I used to be able to name almost all of them real quickly. But they would use Lampara nets, which are smaller than seine nets for shallow water fish. And then they would do long line for larger fish like tuna and salmon. But they would also catch large rock cod with it too. And my uncle always felt that they shouldn't allow big nets for rock cod fishing, that they should all be long line, because one, it didn't damage the fish as much and didn't damage the environment and the ocean bottom like drag boats do. So eliminating drag boat fishing has been a big benefit to the bay, and allowing rockfish to replenish in shallower water has also been a big benefit. The one fish that hasn't returned, and I have a theory about it, of course, is salmon. And that's because they come up in rivers, just like those humpback whales did. The reason the humpbacks go up is that's part of their environment. And you can see seals in the San Lorenzo River between the freeway and the Soquel, or the Soquel Bridge, or the Water Street Bridge. You can see them up there at high tides. They come in and they're also hunting salmon up there.
Right. And yeah, Bree put a little bit more information in the chat about that whale. Apparently there was one whale came twice in 85 and 90, and then later whale mama and her baby named Humphrey, Delta, and Dot, respectively. And apparently Kevin shared that there's a children's book about Humphrey the whale.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then Lisa was wondering, so she sees fishers on the coastline, just like standing on the cliffs with cast line fishing, and she's wondering what they're trying to catch.
Well, I don't know who she's seeing, but there are a couple different types. From the coast, you can get striped bass. And one of my cousins loves fishing for striped bass or sea bass. They're beautiful. And then you can catch all types of perch.
Okay.
And then you can catch flatfish, flounder, and halibut. The entrance to the current Santa Cruz Wharf, when I was a kid, was known as Halibut Row, because halibut used to come in very shallow water, and they're bottom fish, they're flatfish like flounder and sand dabs. The amount of different types of fish out there are really amazing, and I love seeing people fish still, because it means to me that the bay is still alive. But it gets back to this sea monster again. You go out there, you go to the end. I love going to the end of the Santa Cruz Wharf still. And I love looking across to Monterey and the mountains that overlook Big Sur, the Santa Lucias. And you just don't know what's out there. And you can imagine that for these groups of immigrants who just came, there was something magical, mystical, mysterious, and a little frightening at times about what could be out there. Now, we talked at the beginning that this was all Matsoon land, the different native California tribes that inhabited California. And I want to say that, I am grateful to them for wanting to care for these resources, both on land and at sea. I don't know if they had myths about sea monsters. I don't, and that would be interesting to know. And I'm sure there are people who do know about those myths. So that's one thing I'm gonna check up on. Yeah. And but we do know that they had a very strong relationship to both the river and the bay. Mm-hmm. They harvested fish from both, shellfish from both, and did so in a way that didn't destroy the ecosphere of those places. And it's also important to note that California in all of the Americas was one of the most densely populated regions of the Americas. The whole myth that there was, a handful of natives in California is absolute historical lie, and way more densely populated than the plains. So that whole myth is really doesn't give a sense of the history of those people.
Yeah, and the talk that we're going to have on November 8th, it's an online talk with Mike Groen. It's going to be specifically about coastal relationships that the Amundsen's ancestors had with the coast based on archaeological evidence, specifically looking, because we've had sea level change since there have been people inhabiting this area, and there's actually archaeological sites out covered by the ocean right now because there has been sea level rise because of glaciation, changes of glaciation periods. So yeah, that'll be a really great one to continue this conversation. So hopefully you can join us for that one too, Jeff. And
I would like to.
Yeah. And then Rita just shared a wonderful fact that rockfish live up to 200 years. Yeah. Which is wild. So no wonder that one was so big. She says NOAA fisheries now dictate the BOFFs, big old fat females, are returned if caught. So that's a good bit of information about our fish in the bay. Very cool. And you also mentioned, Jeff, that this idea of people coming to this space for the first time and looking out on the bay and just having this sort of awesome experience with it, and also maybe a little frightening. And I just wanted to highlight that that's sort of what our exhibit is all about, is that dichotomy that people have with the ocean, that there's so much to love about it, and there's also such a long history of people being a little nervous about it, or actually having trials at sea with seafaring and shipwrecks and these ancient myths that we have of sea monsters that go back as far as we have civilization, that you shared at the beginning. And it continues to be this really interesting relationship. And especially we get into conservation issues of this sort of idea of humans as monster now too. And so I really hope that folks joining us tonight get a chance to come explore the exhibit and kind of get in conversation with us about those dichotomies. And I just want to really thank you for doing this talk for us tonight. I learned so much, and I learned so much about my home, and I just love learning more about the old fishing families and these wonderful stories and wonderful old photos. So thank you so much for putting this all together for us. Do you want to say any final words?
I really want to thank you. and the museum for having me do this. I'm working like 60-hour weeks at other stuff right now, and I'm glad it allowed me to carve out some time to do this. Just going back and reading about people I loved in their youth is really a remarkable thing. And what a blessing that is. And then the discoveries and sort of the realizations I had, and more questions that got raised for me. One of the things I really have a distaste for historians who think they're experts on anything. And I can be guilty of that too. I'm sure I like to think I'm an expert on the Santa Cruz Wharf and dig in depth about things. And there are always ways to explore, either through oral history of people still alive, or broadening monsters there are out there in the world. And then to really think deeper about, California history. We're talking about 150, 200, 250 years of European history in the region. And the Mutson, and we just are getting the tip of the iceberg about that history. So I'm always excited about learning new things about where I live too.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, there's always more to learn, and I'm inspired to learn more about my family after hearing all the efforts you put in to learning about yours. So many good stories out there, and like you said, there's always more. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to send a follow-up email probably tomorrow after I'm able to get this video put up, and then you can watch it again, and there will be some other resources in that email, and hope to see you at the museum soon, and have a good night. Thank you again, Jeff.
Thank you.
All right, bye.